Hello and welcome to another edition of Veterans Corner. I'm Marshal Preston, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired, and your host for today's segment. Veterans Corner is an initiative of your Westborough Veterans Advisory Board and graciously produced by our partners here at Westborough Television. The goal of Veterans Corner is to share information on topical issues that may affect our veterans, families, residents, and friends within our community. It's also an opportunity to spotlight local veterans, where we seek to share some of their experiences and stories, to highlight their service and continued civic contributions to the community at large. And by doing so, we hope to educate the community of the variety and breadth of experiences that veterans have, and perhaps break down some of the assumptions, biases, or stereotypes that we may hold on to, consciously or unconsciously. And to that end, we're quite fortunate to have Michael Barretti Jr., Commander U.S. Navy, with us today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation ahead. Mike, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Veterans Corner.
Wonderful.
I should also note to our large audience that you have been selected and graciously accepted the role for Grand Marshal for our 2025 Memorial Day event.
It's a huge honor. Thank you.
So, well, welcome. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, great. I was born in the Bronx. I was raised here in Westborough since 1973, 74, when my folks moved into town. Graduate of Westborough High.
Class of?
Class of 90.
All right.
Yes. So it seems like forever ago.
Okay.
Ended up at college at University of Miami through a little bit of a roundabout route.
Florida, Ohio?
Florida. Is there another one?
I can't.
And came from a military family. My dad was a retired Marine who also spent time here with you at Veterans Corner. After college, did some research work and ended up in medical school, funded by the Navy, which is how I came to serve through the Navy Scholarship Program. And I've been all over the country, been all over the world, and wound up back here in Westborough with my wife, Aileen, and our three kids, Dylan, Gavin, and Lachlan, 15, 13, and 11.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, continue down that. Tell me sort of how you understand that you grew up with a father from the Marines, so my assumption is that there's some connection and awareness of service, but tell us a little bit about how you found the Navy scholarship.
Sure. So, thinking back to when I was a kid, I never had aspirations really of serving. I was always in awe of my father's service, the parts of it that he spoke of, which was not a lot. He was a Vietnam veteran, combat veteran, Purple Heart. He didn't talk a lot about his experiences when I was growing up, but it was always that mystique behind it. I never really thought of it until I had to find a way to pay for medical school, and that led me to the Health Professions Scholarship Program. Could have been Air Force, Army, or Navy. I missed the Air Force deadline, so the next up was the Navy. I applied for the scholarship, and I remember my father saying, "Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, really, I want you to think about this." I said, "Dad, it's 1999. I mean, there's nothing going on in the world. What's the worst that could happen?" I found out.
2 years later, yeah.
So, yeah. I was accepted to the Health Professions Scholarship Program. It was a great load off my shoulders to have full scholarship to medical school. I did medical school in a civilian school in California outside of San Francisco. And with the understanding that it was 4 years active duty payback, 4 years roughly reserve or IRR to follow. And I ended up just staying reserves. I did just over 4 years active duty, but then had to come back for fellowship training in medicine and pulmonology and whatnot, and transitioned to the reserves after that, and stayed in the reserves, until 2018, 2019. And everyone says, "Well, why didn't you stay in for the full 20? I said, it doesn't really work that way. Yeah. When you get out of active duty, it's not a 20 and done retirement. A lot of my years were considered deferred years during medical school and training, so I would have easily been in until 2030 to secure a retirement out of the reserves, which raising a young family and the job that I have wasn't doable.
Right.
So I regret it, I miss it, but I think I made the right decision overall.
Yeah. Well, so where did you do your 4 years of active, and how does that work within the medical world?
Good question. Typically, coming out of medical school on the scholarship, depending on what's happening in the world, they ask people to do a general medical officer tour, which you'll finish medical school, you'll do 1 year of internship, and they'll station you in the Navy. You'll be on a ship or in a branch clinic or something like that, which is all I really thought of. And then you'll come back and do your residency training after. Some people can go right through to residency training. It's pretty few and far between, depending on the needs of the Navy. They usually need the general medical officers first. So I was at UMass for my internship here in Worcester, and I got a call from my recruiter. It's 2004. It was February 2004, and he said, you know, you're going to come in for a GMO tour this year. You're finishing internship in June. We need you for at least 2 years GMO. I said, no problem, I expected it. He said, do you have any thoughts of where you want to go? I said, you know, I'm not a USIS grad, which is the military's medical school. I wasn't a Naval Academy grad. I'm going to make it easy for you. Stick me on any ship anywhere in the world. I don't care. And he said, okay, how about 2nd Marine Division, Camp Lejeune? And I said, no. How about any ship anywhere in the world? And he said, oh, okay. How about the 2nd Marine Division, Camp Lejeune? Which is when I learned that the Marines didn't have their own doctors for a reason, being Department of the Navy, that's where they get them.
Yep.
So my dad laughed his ass off. I heard him cackling on the phone when I told him. My mother's yelling in the background, I don't want him going there. And my dad's like, I was there 37 years ago, and you're going to love it. And,
About time to get some culture.
oh, exactly. So it was a great. I call it the best experience I never wanted.
Yep.
Yeah. So showed up at Lejeune, summer 2004 for what they call field medical training, a couple of months of class and field work to transition from the Navy to the Marine Corps. You start doing things by Marine regs. You're wearing Marine uniforms. You're answering to Marine officers. You're really not that much in the Navy anymore.
Okay.
It's a different story. And my first battalion was an artillery unit. So artillery units are great because the doctors don't do anything but sit at the battalion aid station and hang out in the back, in the rear with the gear, drinking beer and that kind of stuff, you know.
Waiting for somebody to walk in.
Well, exactly. And we went for exercises at Fort Bragg, and we did this and that. I was at Lejeune Camp, down in North Carolina. And then I got moved from artillery to regiment very briefly before they put me back with infantry.
Okay.
That's where the fun started. So I'm a guy with 1 year of postgraduate education in medicine, which in the grand scheme of things is next to nothing.
Right.
You know how to tie your shoes in the hospital, and that's about it. You can order Tylenol. That's what it comes down to. So, and being an internal medicine specialist at the time, you're not a surgeon, you're not a trauma doc, and yet they say GMO is going to be it. So I get assigned to a unit that then was attached to a Marine Expeditionary Unit, the 22 MU,
Okay.
which is now a plussed-up infantry battalion with LAR, tanks, reconnaissance, you name it, we have it. And you get deployed, and that's it. And said, okay, we're going to go on a MU, which used to be considered a med cruise. You get on a bunch of ships, you do your workups first for 6 months before you get ready to do it, then you deploy for 6 or 7 months or whatever the time frame is. And it's typically a Mediterranean cruise. You hit a couple of ports, you do some exercises here and there. Not during the Iraq War.
That's what the brochure said.
That's what the brochure said. Yeah, it's the Private Benjamin.
Yes.
This is the new army.
Yeah.
No, as soon as you get on the ships, it's like, okay, we're going right to Iraq.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So you spent the time doing the workup before you get there, and I am 1 year out of medical school with a battalion of 1,200 Marines, or a battalion landing team of 1,200 Marines. I have a doc who's actually junior to me, and I'm not sure how that happened since we had the same level of training, but I was considered the battalion surgeon, he was the medical officer, and that was all the training we got. 3 months of very hardcore trauma training. It was disturbing. I tell people about some of the things that we did practicing on each other, live pigs,
Yep.
PETA wasn't very involved in that, I can assure you, but the pigs were treated as humanely as possible. And we went to Iraq, so we sailed from North Carolina across the Atlantic into the Mediterranean, hit a quick port in Rota, which was great.
Yep.
Through the Suez Canal, and then we got pulled for a while to do anti-piracy operations.
Okay.
And the first trauma...
So are you on a carrier? What vessel are you on?
I was on an LHA,
Okay.
which is, it looks like a small carrier.
All right.
It's for vertical takeoff and landing.
Yep.
A lot of helicopters, a lot of Harriers. It looks like a small aircraft carrier, but it's an amphibious landing craft with a well deck where small LCU crafts would ferry ships or troops from ship to shore.
Right.
And we're in a strike group with a couple of destroyers and a sub, and so there's, I think, 7 ships at the time going out. We get through the Suez, get pulled for anti-piracy operations, and lo and behold, run into some pirates. 4 little pirate skiffs, no bigger than this small room, pull up next to one of our destroyers and start shooting RPGs at it. They lost badly. Most of them were neutralized outright. The ones that survived were flown onto our ship because we had the biggest medical capability of the strike group. So the first combat trauma I worked on was a Somali pirate who was full of holes, and we had to fix him up along with a couple of his buddies and turn them over to another third world country that handled them after that.
Yep.
North African nation, yeah.
So, well, quickly for everyone else, like I think it's important to note that we care for our enemies.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's part of the job, part of the responsibility.
The job's not to go out and kill people. The job's to do the job.
Yep.
The people you have to deal with in the meantime are still people, and whether they're friendly, whether they're enemy, we still care for them.
Yep.
So after that, we head north to Kuwait, land at Kuwait Naval Base, and fly up to Al-Assad, Iraq. From Al-Assad, which was our entry point, spend a couple weeks there getting your gear ready, getting everything in shape, and then drive out to our city. What
time frame again?
2005.
Okay.
So late 2005. We were just outside Ramadi. The Battle of Fallujah had happened. The taking of Ramadi had happened. Mm-hmm. We were the next city up the river, Al-Heat. It was a nasty area. It was right in that Al Anbar province, in that really horrible kind of. There was a road that came from Syria into the Euphrates Valley, and Al-Heat was at the end of that road. So this is where the insurgents were funneling into Iraq from Syria.
Right.
And this was the city that they kind of way stationed in before they fanned out to the rest of the country, and that was our city. So we spent several months there. Not a great time. You know, we did our job. It was hard, but it was necessary. Mm-hmm. You know, it was interesting. Like I said, the best experience I never wanted.
Right. And still 1,200 Marines that you were responsible for, or primarily caring for.
We were split up into multiple forward operating bases in the city. The MU command was a little bit outside the city at Camp Heat. That was up the road quite a ways. Within the city, we had, I want to say, 4 forward operating bases. The one that I was at was the casualty collection point, centrally located off to the side. It was an old train station on a railroad that had long been bombed out. You know, we had trains half off the tracks and in disrepair, to say the least, out there, and we had a wire and some HESCO barriers around this very, very small this very small operating base. At that location, I had, I want to say, 200 Marines, maybe 60 or 70 Iraqi Army that was embedded with us, and 18 or 20 corpsmen, which is the Navy's version of medics. And these guys were fantastic. These young kids were incredible. And it was myself and another Marine 03. I was a Navy 03, Marine 03, and we were it on the base. We were the ranking officers on the base. It was interesting because I had no idea what I was doing. So from a military standpoint, I was as green as green. A medical standpoint, I was good to go. But it's a wake-up call, not being in that environment for a long time leading up to that, and then being thrown into that. It was trial by fire, and it's typical. I think it's everyone's combat experience where 95% of your time is very boring. Yep. You're sitting around doing a lot of nothing, training, getting ready, making sure everyone knows what to do, and then it changes on a dime. and the other 5% of your time is the end of the world.
Hair on fire,
So
chaos.
yeah, and then it goes
Frantic
right back.
communications, yeah.
So
Okay.
it was interesting.
Did you, helicopter pad for?
We did for casualties that we had to move out. So we were being the only dock in a helicopter flight radius for these troops was daunting. The Navy works with what they have, and I tell people this story, and they said, "Well, where was your attending? Someone who's experienced and years of training." And I said, "Well, they were a helicopter flight away back at Al-Assad." They said, "So you're out there alone?" I said, "Yeah, it's all we had. It's what the Navy has. They push you as far forward as possible." I think they learned from previous wars that the closer a physician is to the troops, not just the medics, the better the survivability.
Yep, the golden hour and the
Exactly. Unfortunately, you can't get the resources you need that far forward when you need them. They've done a great job over the years tailoring what combat response medicine looks like. And it changes. It changes war to war based on what your situation looks like. At that time, it was the medics, it was the doc, and anything they couldn't handle, you flew out to the next echelon of care. So it was daunting. We had a generator on the base and one electric line going into the aid station or my trauma area with one light bulb on it. So most of the work we did was with headlamps and flashlights in an old maintenance garage at the train station that we had to sweep the dirt out of and put our stuff in, and all your supplies stacked up against the wall, and what comes in, and what you can fly out, you have to wait till they can get a helicopter down to get it in and go.
Well, I was the senior commander for a base in Niger, and we had a very tiny surgical team that was embedded with the special ops community, which and the limited facility that we had to offer them. I'm having flashbacks.
Yes, exactly.
I can picture it.
Exactly.
Awesome team.
Someone said it was like MASH. I said no, MASH is the Ritz-Carlton compared to what we had. So
okay. So you're 03. Is the other doc co-located with you, or
no?
He
was on the other side of the river, so
Okay.
he was one of our other FOBs at the other side of the river. And this kid, I love him to death. He's still a great friend of mine.
Yeah.
But he was over there for the experience.
Okay.
He's like, I want my combat action ribbon. I want this. I'm like, you're kind of an idiot. Just go do your job and just make sure everyone's taken care of. And he went so far as to say, okay, I want to go out on patrol. I want to get my combat experience. All right, he goes out. His base gets hit. He says, I missed it. He goes back to the base, the patrol gets hit. So I said, this is God telling you don't belong in combat.
Yes.
He's a good kid. He ended up as an anesthesiologist in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So it was good.
All right.
Yeah, we were good friends.
Okay, so that takes you through the end of 2005, 2006.
Yeah. So 2006. Actually, this was an interesting story. So. Finishing internship, going to a 2-year GMO tour, you have the option of staying in for all 4 years or applying for a Navy deferment to come back out of active duty, back to civilian life, to finish your residency training and then go back in and finish your active duty time. And we had just had, I think, the worst 36 hours straight that I've had probably in my life. And this was before the days of iPhones. So we had a sat phone.
And I was going to ask how often you got to call home. And
I would call home about once every other week.
Okay.
So again, the Marine 03 and I had kind of a policy. The sat phone's not supposed to be used for personal use, but we said, okay, once a week or once every other week, everybody gets 5 minutes.
Yep.
Pass the sat phone around, call home, tell them you're okay, and that's it. And we all did that. And I picked up the sat phone after that 36 hours, and I called my program director back at UMass, and I'll never forget Dr. Cullinane. She was great. She was my mentor during my first year. And she said, "Oh, Mike, I haven't heard from you in a while. How are you?" I said, "Not great." She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Where are you?" I said, "Iraq." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Not really." I said, "Can I come back next year for residency?" And she said, "Sure, we'll make a spot for you." So I applied to the Navy and got a deferment after our tour, after we got home, and transition back for another 2-year deferment to come out and finish residency back at UMass.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was good. And then went back so that was 06 to 08, and then went back in 08 to a Navy command at Naval Air Station Jacksonville.
Okay.
At the Naval Hospital there, and did primary care for a few years. The Navy said, okay, you're going to come back in as an internist, you're going to do primary care in our clinic. It's not really an active duty clinic. It is an active duty clinic, it supports the base, but there's a huge retiree community in Jacksonville, Florida. Yep. It's enormous. And it's really like a civilian primary care practice where you're getting families, you're getting retirees, you're getting spouses and kids and whatnot. And primary care was I found out not for me. It's a tough life. Believe me, the primary care docs should be
even with a particularly compliant patient crowd.
And nobody's compliant in primary care. Or they're few and far between. But those guys should be making 10 times what they're making to deal with some of the stuff they do. So every day was worse than the day before for me because I wasn't built for it. And my CO walked back into my office and he said, hey, Lieutenant Barretti, I've got some bad news for you. You're getting deployed again. And I said, thank God. I said, oh my God. I said, send me back to Iraq, send me to Afghanistan, send me anywhere but here. And he said, well, actually, you're going to go out on the Comfort, the hospital ship. Oh. He said, we have a humanitarian, they do it every year. They send the Comfort off the East Coast, the Mercy off the West Coast, and the West Coast will hit Australia, Southeast Asia, whatnot. And the East Coast ship is the Caribbean, Central and South America. So that's what we were doing. We did 7 countries in, I think, 5 months. Left out of Norfolk, Virginia, and hit all of the places that don't have good medical care. Yeah. That was an eye-opening trip. In a lot of ways, that was harder than Iraq. Just seeing the way people live and what we take for granted. Right. The first country we hit was Haiti, and this is before the earthquake. And honestly, I can't imagine it was much worse after the earthquake. After what I saw,
it didn't get any better.
They just rearranged the rubble. I mean, it's that poor place. It has years to go before it hits third world. I think it was sad. It was eye-opening. So anything we could bring to them was desperately needed, appreciated, but it was heart-wrenching. You learn what compassion fatigue is. Mm-hmm. You can only do so much, and then you start to feel guilty that you can't do more. Right. And you're limited by your resources and your time. So yeah, some of the stuff that we saw there was pretty rough. Yeah. So it was Haiti, it was Dominican Republic, which slightly better. We did Antigua. I'm not quite sure why. I think there was more of a political show your face. The Chinese were dumping a lot of dollars into that country at that time. So we made a good presence there. Then it was Liberty Ports in Cartagena, Colombia, Panama. We did Colón, Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and a place called Tumaco, Colombia on the West Coast, which apparently is the cocaine exporting capital of South America. Who knew? All the rivers come out of the Andes and come through this city, or area, I should say, and then off into the Pacific and up towards Mexico and the U.S. Okay. Very, very underserved. Reminded me a lot of Haiti, actually. Really, really sad place. Okay. So that was an uplifting tour, I should say. Yes. Come back home grateful. Yes, absolutely.
Are you married at this point? When do you?
Yes, I was married in 2001 during medical school.
Okay, so Eileen got to see experience.
Absolutely. So when I got into medical school, I actually got in, I think, because of her. I applied to a bunch of different places, and she said, well, I'm a software engineer. Let's go to California. I'll get a job out there. And this is during the internet bubble. And I applied to a school in San Francisco that I really, really liked. And I don't think I would have gone there had it not been for her. So we went out there together. She got a job, do a great job, the dream of every software engineer working in downtown San Francisco. We lived across the bay, takes the ferry into work, and spent a few years out there, then started doing your rotations around the country, ended up in Pennsylvania for my 3rd year, and then all over the country for the 4th year. Okay. And then we got married during my 3rd year.
Fun. Yeah. All right. What is her If I were to ask her, what was her perspective of military service?
You know, I think it's different in the medical community and the military. It's not really entrenched in that lifestyle. You know, you don't usually live on base housing, so you're not really a part of that community. When I was stationed in North Carolina, she stayed up here because she was working. There's not a lot of internet jobs, not a lot of software engineering jobs in Southeast North Carolina.
Nope.
So she stayed up here, but I said, listen, I'll go down and you can come down eventually, but I'm planning on deploying as soon as I get there. So then it got put off, and the next thing you know, she's up here the whole time, and then I just get deployed.
Right.
And when I came back up here.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was always a part of it, definitely supportive, but we were separated a lot of the time. When I was stationed in Florida, we moved down there together.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a different experience.
Right. All right. And then, so after Jacksonville and the comfort.
Yep.
Now your time
So
is up again.
active duty time is up.
Okay.
I was going back for subspecialty training. I was interested in pulmonary and critical care medicine. So I started applying to civilian programs and Navy programs. I said, I'll stay in if they give me a spot.
Right.
They actually they offered me a fellowship spot in San Diego at Balboa Naval Hospital in San Diego. I was going to take it, and then I got a last-minute offer back at UMass, which is near home, which is
Right.
fantastic. I mean, great training facility, great hospital. So I turned down the Navy's offer and accepted the UMass offer, only to find out that I guess the Navy wasn't happy about this because before I rotated out, in my last couple of months in Jacksonville, my CO came back into my office and said, "You're deploying again." And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I'm out in 2 months." I said, "I'm going back to fellowship." And he said, "No, you were name selected for a year in Afghanistan."
Oh.
I said, "Well, that name selected as an internist." I said, "I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. I'm not a neurosurgeon. Those get name selected to
Right.
these deployments." I said, "How did this happen?" He goes, "I don't know, but you're going." So I made a bunch of phone calls. Eventually got the detailer, the nationwide detailer for internal medicine, and I said, "How am I going to Afghanistan?"
I got 2 months left.
And he said, "Somebody put your name on my desk and said you're going to Afghanistan." And I said, "Well, I'm going to lose my fellowship spot, and these are not easy to come by." And he said, "Well, you know, we all have to do our part." I said, "It's not like I haven't deployed before." He said, "You have?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I did a combat deployment to Iraq a few years ago."
You're
He
my
said, "Oh."
detailer. Do you not have my file?
Apparently not. And he looked it up and he said, "Oh, okay." He goes, "I got 10 guys who haven't deployed before. You're off the hook." And that was it.
Okay.
So got out of active duty, came back up here, started fellowship, and of course, you know, they suck you back in. So then they say, "Well, if you want to come to the reserves, we'll kick in a lot of money to supplement your fellowship salary," which is not a lot. It's definitely, you know, a training salary in medicine. And with kids already, my daughter had already been born, I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." So signed up for the reserves at Newport, Rhode Island, which if you're going to do reserves, that's the place to do it.
That's a pretty good place,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's wonderful. And I really enjoyed it. It was great. I spent from 2010 to 2018 in the reserves. And I was going every month. And my job turned into, after fellowship, when I got established in my career, I was doing every other weekend at work.
Okay.
So to do 2 weekends a month at work and then another weekend a month with the reserves
It's
got
tiring,
to be,
yeah.
it got to be a lot with little kids. So my wife and I talked about it, and I made the decision that I wasn't going to continue it.
Right.
So I think I had run my course. By that time, I had made 05, and my dad was an 04 when he retired, so I made sure he knew that.
He was at the promotion ceremony.
Yeah, he was, yep. So I had done all I wanted to do, and I think it was time to let it go.
Well done. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your service.
No, thank you, thank you.
Looking back, are there particular characters that jump out?
Oh, a billion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That the one that I will always think of is my XO in my infantry battalion, Major Bell.
Okay.
He comes from a long line of very distinguished Marine officers. His dad, Vandy Bell, was a extremely decorated World War II veteran. I mean, incredibly decorated. One of the, just, you read this guy's, the stories about him were just not to be believed. And his son grew up in those footsteps. And I think it was his job to bust my balls. That's how he looked at it. And,
was he a Marine?
He was.
Okay.
So, as the battalion surgeon, there's no other doctor in the unit. That's it. And again, 1 year experience out of medical school, and you're answering to a Marine commander, the battalion commander and the XO, who are Marine officers, and they don't know anything about medicine. They expect you to know about medicine. And that's all they want to hear, is that you're going to do it, you're going to do it right, and that's the end of the story. So trying to live up to that and learn the Marine discipline at the same time was interesting. I tell everyone most of my career was spent at attention, like the Top Gun scene with the flyby. So getting yelled at by somebody, and those were some of the best times, actually. I look back and I don't know how I didn't laugh out loud at some of the things that were screamed in my face. And I think everyone went through it. I think the Marines do it more.
Yes,
But they do it with such a flair that it belittles you and cracks you up at the same time. My XO had gotten so angry with me over something one time. And I don't think I did anything wrong, but it wasn't to his standard. And he's screaming at me, and it ends with, "Doc, and I am going to," and I'm going to paraphrase this, "I am going to effing reduce you to checking the crap levels in the Porta-Johns."
Okay.
So he was a colorful character.
Yeah.
We used to go to a weekly med-legal brief before the deployment. During the workup, the battalion JAG officer and myself, we would meet with the XO every week and talk about which Marines were not going to be able to deploy based on medical or legal reasons. And the JAG officer would go first and say, "Okay, sir, I got PFC Schmuckatelli here who, got arrested for DUI, and this guy's got a court date here, he's not going." And, they need every finger on the trigger they can during war. And the XO shaking his head, he's like, "Okay, he's off, All right, Doc, what do you got?" "Sir, I got, Private so-and-so who broke his leg. He's going to need 6 months to rehab it." "Forget that. He can do it on the ship. He's going with us." "Okay, I got another guy who's getting worked up for lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer." "Nope, I don't think so. He can do it when he gets back. He's coming with us." Wow. And after like 10 of these in a row, I rubbed my forehead. I said, "Sir, you know what?" I said, "I'm going to get you your own honorary medical degree, and I'm going to stop coming to these meetings." And he just put his finger in my face. He goes, "You're on thin ice, Doc." I said, "Okay." So fast forward.
What am I here for? I mean, you
Well,
asked for medical opinion.
yeah. So at the end of the deployment, when everyone's now friendly, at the end of deployment officers golf outing, when we came back from Iraq, and there's a whole drinks and slap it on the back and everything else, and there's a whole bunch of little funny awards they give to each other. The other medical officer and I had printed up an honorary medical degree. And every time he talked about medicine, it was effing Navy medicine. "Oh, effing Navy medicine." Get all ornery about it. And we printed up a diploma on parchment, framed, from the University of effing Navy Medicine, honorary medical degree to Major Douglas Bell. And we signed it and had it all official. And
I love it.
To this day, I think he still has it on his desk.
Yes.
Yes, and I kept in touch with him for years afterwards. We became pretty good friends, and you can be friends after you're not subordinate and after you're out. And he was a great guy. He was a great, something to look up to. It was really, he was probably the most colorful character.
He's a good one.
Oh, he was fantastic.
Yeah. Like you, there are plenty that jumped to mind, and I was again honored to lead an airbase in Spain, and we hosted 800 Marines. So there are several those, and we, the Air Force, had families. This was a permanent assignment for us, whereas the 800 Marines were deployed. So there was young, rambunctious, highly energetic.
To say the least.
Yes, but there were a couple times, in line at the next, where my wife was like, "Excuse me, Marine? That's my 5-year-old." And you get, all of a sudden, "Oh, I am so sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry, Elise." And then on their way back out, right back to being Marines.
Of course,
they
of
can
course.
turn
It's a
on,
different
turn off,
group.
and great.
We think of the people that really stick out in our minds, and one of my corpsmen, my medics, a kid named Chiarini out of Rhode Island. He was a 21-year-old kid at the time of our deployment. He had already deployed once with the Marines as a corpsman, a medic. His first deployment came home with a Bronze Star with V for, he was an animal. He was the most humble, yet motivated and unrelenting, perfect example of a Navy corpsman I'd ever seen. And he had not only earned the respect of the Marines to where there were, line commanders that wouldn't go out without him. In addition to that, he had chased down an insurgent on foot during his first deployment, tackled him, beat the crap out of him, and dragged him back as a corpsman. I said, okay, great. So he ends up in my BAS, my aid station, and he was every bit of it again. Just one combat experience after another, and he's always, on the job. And he earned a Silver Star with Combat V during our deployment.
Jeez.
And I was with him for that one, in one of the stupider moves that I ever pulled. You don't look for combat. You do your job. And if your job involves it, that's what you do. And we had a quick reaction force, which I'm sure you're familiar with, stationed on our forward operating base, where when you hear the QRF call, it's 30 seconds, get on the convoy, which is already staged, now to wherever you're going.
Right.
Well, a couple of my corpsmen are assigned to the quick reaction force, and we heard QRF up. They start screaming it through the base, and everyone just goes into that, wow, now, and I grabbed my flak jacket, grabbed my helmet, and grabbed my weapon, and I jumped on the truck before I realized I'm not assigned to the quick reaction force. And the doctor's probably not supposed to be out there, okay? So it wasn't a heroic move. It wasn't out of, I'm looking, I want to get in the action. It was just, something's happening, go do it. And I jumped on the truck and went out. And the other corpsman that was supposed to be on it was my chief. And my chief must have been in the head of the burn barrels or wherever he was doing, because he didn't make it on the truck. But the other corpsman looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And now I got time to think about it.
Now you're stuck. Yeah.
Now I'm stuck. So now I'm thinking I got like a 3 or 4 minute ride out to this, and I have no idea what's on the other end of it. And these guys are just absolutely amazing, and I'm just trying to keep up and do my job. And we get to the site, which was an ambush. One of our convoys, and this kid Chiarini was on the convoy, and the convoy had hit an IED with the lead vehicle. Small IED, nothing bad. They stop, dismount, and start looking for, who pulled the trigger on the IED, which is what they do. And then the second IED went off. And this was all staged. So the second IED went off and dropped 5 guys, 4 Marines and one of our translators. And then the ambush started from both sides of the road. So now they're stuck. And we're coming from the other end, and our QRF convoy gets stuck behind the rear vehicle in the convoy, and we get out and start running. And this is where I'm really seeing how good these guys are, because I'm running down the street, like in a fog of just tunnel vision, like, where am I going? I hear something happening that way, and there's Marines just standing every 10 feet in the open, returning fire during this ambush, and these guys are just fearless. And I'm crapping my pants, and I'm running with my other corpsman. My other corpsman takes a round through the back of the leg, and we finally get to a high-back Humvee in the middle of the convoy, where they started collecting the wounded. And it turns out Chiarini, who was in one of the lead vehicles, is making that run back and forth with the wounded. Almost 100 yards each way. He's carrying 3 guys back one at a time, shielding them, returning fire with one hand, dropping them off. We're patching them up real quick, going back and get the other one.
These are not light people.
No. And carrying my own flak jacket and everything was heavy. I can't imagine he was doing that in somebody else's. So he gets everyone back in this vehicle. Now I'm there with my other corpsman, so we start working on them in this high back, semi-protected Humvee, and he goes out and shoots 3 insurgents after that. He was amazing. Yeah. And he's the most humble kid I ever met in my life. And luckily I still keep in contact with him from time to time. So we remain close after that.
Where is he now?
He's a firefighter in Rhode Island.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Just an amazing kid. 21 years old at the time.
God bless him.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah, and thanks to all of the folks out there that,
Oh,
that jump in
it
and
was
serve
great.
and do that.
Now, I got back to the base after that. Once we had a light armored reconnaissance vehicle, like a small, fast tank, who came out and laid waste to the street and ended it. So we get back in the convoys, we're back at the base, and now my chief is there, back from whatever he was doing, and he grabbed me by the collar and shook me silly and said, "What are you thinking?" He said,
That is not your role.
"You don't do that." I said, "Oh, I know, and that was not bravery, that was stupidity, I assure you."
Well, good. I've got two questions, but they're divergent.
Sure.
One is a leadership style, and we can go down that one probably first, and sort of what you pick up from these, high intensity, chaotic environments, or the culture from the Marines versus the Navy. The other one is traces back to that horrible 36 hours and events like this. And was there a transition phase from deployment life back into regular Navy or even civilian life?
Yes. So, first question, leadership style. Never ask anyone to do anything you're not doing yourself. That's it. If you will, there was an old Roman general named Marius. They called him and his troops Marius's mules, and he had the respect of everyone because he would get out and do everything they did. And I think that's the leadership style: is to expect a lot, give a lot, do everything with them. I always tell even the people that work for me now, I'll forgive anything but laziness. If you make a bad decision, if you are unsure about something, if you do something wrong, I don't care. You're willing to learn, and as long as you're doing what you're doing in the interest of the patient and the interest of the job that you're given, I'll take it. I'll forgive anything but laziness. And that was the same then. And I had 70-something corpsmen, 72 corpsmen that were probably better trained than I was for the job we were doing, and let them do their job. Don't tell them how to do it if they already know how to do it. We're leaders not to make followers. We're leaders to make more leaders.
Right.
And I think I always remember that. I'm not trying to amass followers. I'm trying to make people better leaders who I'll answer to someday.
Yes. Yeah. I am training 5 replacements for me every
Absolutely.
day, and hoping that they'll do it better.
Absolutely. Now, transitioning from civilian or military back to civilian life, it was difficult. It was hard to separate the adrenaline of that with the lack of the adrenaline or the demands. I mean, not that civilian life is any easier, it's not, but it's different. And in medicine, it's a lot different. Not everything has to be done like someone shooting at you while you're trying to do it. And there was a transition time of having to step back and calm down and say, you're a professional, and do this now civilian style.
Right.
It's not any less important. It's not any less difficult. It's hard to describe, but it's different.
No, that's fair. I think that the military also began to appreciate those transition too. So there were, sort of having been stationed at Ramstein, I know there were some deliberate, sort of cool down, decompression periods.
Yes.
As folks would come through, they'd force them to stay for 2-3 days at Ramstein before going back to the States and embracing wife and family.
I don't think anyone described that better than who was the author of On Killing? Grossman, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, who described the difference of deployment during World War II, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, as opposed to Vietnam in particular. And that's where we lost a generation of heroes. And this is something I'm actually probably going to talk about on Monday, is that war was different than other wars in the sense that World War II, you were part of your unit. Your unit shipped together to war. You served together as a unit. You returned together, and you had a decompression period where you could share your emotional burdens, whether outright or subconsciously or just through the act of being together with others, and diffuse that stress before you return home. Unfortunately, Vietnam was a war of individual augmentees. People got individual orders to go to Vietnam, join your unit. And when you rotated out after your year, you got an individual order to come back.
Yeah.
And you flew back alone, and you flew back, unfortunately, to a social situation that wasn't very forgiving at the time. And there's an entire generation of heroes that suffered with their own memories and guilt and stress.
Questions and unanswered. Yeah.
Exactly, without the ability to diffuse that in a group setting, in a structured group setting, which is what now they do again, and they make a very, very high priority of combat stress awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And you can call it PTSD, you can call it shell shock, they call it different names through every generation and era, but they screen for it, and they screen for it ad nauseum, believe me. And then they screen again after you say, I'm fine. They say, nope, you got to fill out another questionnaire and talk to somebody. So I have combat stress from the combat stress screening. So, but that's a big part of rotating back to civilian life is having that decompression period to adjust in a group of people that are like-minded. Now, we did the same thing. I mean, we left Iraq and we came home and we had a Liberty week. We had a Liberty port in Palma, Mallorca. Oh my God, no better place to decompress than Mallorca. It was fantastic. But we were together, and then we were back on the ships and back across the Atlantic, and then we got home, and there was the officers' golf outing, and my wife had flown down, and I'll never forget this, and I had to get a golf shirt because everything I had was already in boxes or here or being sent back up. And I said, I got to pick up a golf shirt for this outing, tomorrow. And she and I went to the mall in North Carolina. And we walked in, and I was there for 30 seconds, and I panicked. And I started sweating. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, I got to go. I can't be here. And I walked out. And we got back in the car, and I was breathing. And it hit me that it was the first time in 6-7 months I had been around a crowd of people I didn't know.
Yeah.
And you didn't have the security of having the people around you that you feel safe with in an environment that was unsafe.
Right.
And the mall was not unsafe, but it was that first recognition of I'm alone, and I don't have that unit with me anymore. And that was really, it only happened that once, but I recognized it, and it really, and it made me appreciate what people who saw a lot more than I did and went through a lot worse than I did go through. I talk about my 1 or 2 experiences here, and it was small potatoes compared to what other people go through. I don't want to, glamorize that in any way. I'm a doc who could barely find the right end of my weapon. In fact, no one wanted to be next to me during the weapons training during the quals at Camp Lejeune. It was that, but it was a big eye opener to what that unit dynamic really meant to me.
Yeah. Well, I could go on.
Oh, totally.
Would love it. But our kind folks have
Sure.
Reminded me that we do have a time limit. But I'm looking forward to your Memorial Day, comments.
Wonderful.
Given everything you've shared already, I think you've got a wonderful connection to, that messaging and who we're trying to recognize, honor, respect. Your father's generation and the challenge of Vietnam, I think, is a particularly powerful one. Hats off to that community.
Absolutely.
And hats off to you and the rest
Thank
of our
you.
service
And to
members
you.
for going to these places and going forth and doing the job.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Is there anything that you'd like to say, or something that I haven't asked you?
No.
Something that your kids want you. There's an opportunity here to share something to your kids. If you want.
They know a lot. I've always talked to them about some of my experiences, and I would never force them or push them to serve, but I'd be happy if they did at the same time. Everyone's different. And serving doesn't mean joining the military. Serving sometimes just means being an active member of your community and setting an example.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be with a uniform on, to be a hero. It doesn't.
I wholeheartedly agree.
So
To that, we've got Memorial Day coming up, and you can come out and help serve and recognize and be part of the community.
absolutely. So however they serve, I want them to serve. It doesn't have to be in uniform, but they will serve.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for spending some
Thank
time. As we wrap up today's session, I'd like to remind our audience that our Veteran Service Officer, Jeff Farrell, maintains an office on the first floor of the Town Hall, and whose contact information can be seen on the screen at the end of today's show. Both he and the Veterans Advisory Board are here to help guide you to the resources and benefits that your uniformed service may have earned. Thank you again to Michael Barretti. Thank you again to Westborough Television for their support in putting this together. Please come out to Memorial Day celebration and help us honor and remember our veterans. And until next time, thanks for joining us. I hope you have a great week.